Hi, everyone. My name is Gavin Luder, Managing Director of the UniverCity Alliance. If you were to look at this conference and say, what is one session that feels a little different than every other session, it would be mine. I know this is a mental health campus safety conference, so we're all about inclusion here. But I'm not presenting much about mental health. I think hopefully what you'll be able to take from my presentation is some good practices, I believe, in campus community partnership building. And I think if you really look for it, there is a good framework here for how to make partnerships happen with any community organization. But in particular, we work a lot with local government. So if you're looking at making some connections with your health department, we have like a framework that I think might be a good way for y'all to think about it. Also, if you attended last year's, I don't know if it was this conference that I presented at? Oh, okay, great. Then you may have never heard some of my stuff, but you might have heard some of it if you came to another session that I presented at last year. It was virtual. But if not, it's all going to be brand new. So this is great. I'm Gavin Luder, again, Managing Director of the UniverCity Alliance. I'm going to explain what that is. But first, I just want to say I love Ohio, in particular because I'm a huge tennis fan and they have one of the biggest tennis tournaments here in the world. It is literally one of it's like the Grand Slams and then 9 huge tournaments. One's going on right now in Rome, if anybody's a big tennis fan. But one of them is in Cincinnati, and I went last year, and I'm a huge tennis fan. And I love roller coasters. I'm a total roller coaster buff. Unfortunately, I think Cedar Point is kind of getting rid of Top Thrill Dragster, which is the big one that you see on the bottom. I don't know what's happening. They're going to repurpose it. I'm a little nervous. But anyway, and then Banshee is at Kings Island. I don't know if anyone's been on Banshee, but it's like one of my favorite inverted roller coasters. I'm sorry if I'm making you motion sick by simply just talking about it, but I absolutely love coming to Ohio in particular because your coasters and your tennis. So just wanted to mention that. Fun little aside. Just my background, very, very briefly. I identify as a community engagement professional in higher education. I went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad in public and urban affairs. Got my master's in higher education administration at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And then went to the cold. I went to University at Buffalo. And I studied with a guy named Henry Lewis Taylor, got my PhD in educational leadership and policy studies. While I was in Knoxville, I actually worked at a United Way of Greater Knoxville. So, if there are any United Way folks in the house, I'm a former United Way person. Great. And then I went to University of Wisconsin, but before that, I was executive director of Campus Compact of Wisconsin. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Campus Compact, but I was executive director of Wisconsin Campus Compact. My scholarly interests are really around how to get schools and universities and communities to connect. So if anybody is interested in school-university partnerships, I'm very interested in that. And my current role at the UniverCity Alliance, which I'm going to mention. So that's a little bit about my background. All right, so just to kind of frame what we're talking about here. So communities broadly struggle with, especially we're talking cities, counties, towns, and villages, are dealing with really, really complex challenges, especially with all the federal and maybe arguably state dysfunction. A lot of the stuff that is happening at the national level, you might even think of something like immigration, like even at the local level, because our immigration system is broken, cities end up having to deal with things like immigration, even though you think, oh, it's a federal issue. No, cities have to deal with it. Talk to anybody who's living in Texas right now. Cities are having to deal with immigration right up front. They have a lot of practical experience, but they have capacity and bandwidth issues. If you've ever worked with anybody in a city or local government, they rely a lot on consultants. So they oftentimes don't have the capacity internally, and they really need thought partners. In higher ed, on the other hand, we have a lot of experts, but they're siloed, as we're talking about here, how to break down silos. A lot of people willing to ask questions, and a lot of people, I believe, who need real-world experience and training. And I think a lot of people on campuses, especially public and land-grant universities, but not only, they want to make an impact. They want to know that their work is having some kind of positive impact on the world. So let me also say that I think we have a culture problem in higher education. If anybody works in higher ed here, I'm sorry if you're a community partner, you might not be able to identify with this, or you absolutely may because you've tried to work with higher education. Community engagement broadly is not supported by policies, practices, and structures on campus. Essentially, when faculty and staff do this, they do it in spite of the university, not because of the university. That's what I believe. And I believe it's pretty well documented. If anybody's ever tried to get a faculty member to do a community-based learning course, you know what I'm talking about. They say, oh, that would be great. I would love to do it. Or they're like, why would I do this? I'm trying to get tenure. I don't want to teach. Talk to my grad student or something like that. So I believe that we need a new culture. There is a framework for those of you all who are not familiar with this kind of work. A guy named Andy Furco put together a rubric around how to embed community engagement across the institution of higher education. There are 5 dimensions. Is it in the mission? Is there faculty support for it? Is there student support for it? Is there participation for community partners? And broadly, are there institutional dollars that are supporting projects like this? I would highly recommend you go check that out if you really want to do some kind of higher ed culture work in your organization. But I just wanted to mention that we do have a framework for that. And I think what I'm talking about is going to be trying to get at all these different supports. But we can't change the culture overnight. So what do we kind of do in the meantime? And this is where I'm like a real pragmatist. I don't want to be like, oh, darn, we're gonna, until we change tenure and promotion reform, we're never gonna be able to do anything. Tenure and promotion is not changing anytime soon. So we can't be stuck and mired in that problem. So the idea is here that we kind of pose is, what if we could take existing structures in university, and something that university does a lot of is teach. So what if we could take existing courses and basically leverage those courses in a way that meets community needs? Everybody knows there's service learning, community-based learning, but the idea is that these kind of partnerships are individual faculty, individual community partner. Oh yeah, we have a cool course. It would be great if you could do this. And how do they connect? I don't know. They met at a conference like this. They met at the grocery store. It's very haphazard. There's not really a rhyme or reason to it. So how might we be able to do that? And so at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we created an interdisciplinary group of people who care about the future of cities. In a way, I don't know if y'all do your thinking in the shower. I sometimes do my thinking in the shower, and it just kind of hit me this morning in the shower that I feel like what we're almost doing with UniverCity Alliance is creating a new academic department type structure. Instead of having a department of civil and environmental engineering or something like that, you have kind of a common theme or a common purpose that we all care about. In this case, it's cities and local governments. We're worried that the future of cities is getting more complicated. Cities need help in managing their cities, but they don't really know how to necessarily do it on their own, so they need help of experts. So we created this advisory board of about 25 to 30 entities on campus, and I'm not going to read them all, but suffice it to say, if you're in higher ed, you know that you don't usually see tables with people who represent this diverse of backgrounds meeting on any kind of a regular basis. This is kind of weird. I mean, how often does civil and environmental engineering sit down with the Institute for Research on Poverty, sit down with this College of Law? So we created this advisory board, created with the common interest of improving cities, okay? And that's what got people to the table. Hey, I work and care about what cities do, but I'm in this little silo over here. So we created that framework. Then instead of just being a typical networking thing that universities do, I don't know about y'all, but sometimes universities get together, we talk, and sometimes there's not action. I'm a big critic of universities, and I love universities at the same time. So I get critiqued by people on the right and the left. But I think that's okay. I think higher ed has a problem, and we also have great ideas for solutions. So what we did was we created a framework for action instead of just talking. The idea here is that we created an application process for any community, any local government who wants help on a problem. They apply to us kind of out of nowhere. I don't know who these people are, but we get the word out among different local government conferences and say, we need help with a variety of projects. Then we say, yes, we'll work with you to scope out those problems and make sure that we get them scaled in an appropriate way that a class can take them on. And then we basically shop these projects around the university. We're almost like an ambassador for these projects across the entire university. And because we have an interdisciplinary advisory board, I can say, hey, we have a legal issue that one of our community partners want. can you, College of Law person, give me a warm handoff to the person at the College of Law who does this stuff? And they say, yeah, sure, that would be great. I mean, that's what does it mean to have an active board? It means people who are willing to do nice handoffs for you and say, Gavin's cool, trust him. You can work with him. I will admit, if you all are very interested in this, we have, I don't know, is this pointer thing kind of works. Can you all see this EPIC network here? This is essentially the network of people who do this similar kind of local government university partnership building stuff, EPIC, the EPIC network. It's Educational Partnerships for Innovations in Communities network. Anyway, it's the EPIC network. So if anyone's interested, you can find out more at the epicn.org. And right now, we have worked across the state of Wisconsin with 29 different communities. Large, small, we've worked with Milwaukee, and we've worked with the village of Stockholm, which is 67 people. I mean, it doesn't really matter, large or small. It doesn't, a lot of people said, oh, University of Wisconsin-Madison can't do work outside of the Madison and Dane County area. No, that's BS. We're working with Polk County right now, and it's 4 hours away. Some of our students may never step foot. They're only doing virtual engagements, but, the students are still reporting that they're getting really, really good results. So the students then in their classes produce some sort of deliverable for the local government. We've all been in higher education. Most of us have a college degree in this room, I assume. We've all had to do projects that are pointless. We've all had to do projects that you write for and you do slave over for so many hours, and then it will never get seen again. That one professor reads it and then they delete it. I don't even know where my students' papers are that I've graded before. I have no idea. So the idea is that how can we take that inefficiency of students doing work that they have to do anyway, but give that legs and give it life and make sure that a local government who might actually need that expertise and knowledge that the students have to learn anyway, that they actually get some kind of practical take-home deliverable from that. So that's the idea here, is we're trying to take the existing stuff that we already do. We're not asking faculty to change dramatically what they're doing or asking the university to create a whole new department, even though it's kind of what we're doing. It's like you don't show up asking the university to change totally. You try to take existing structures and adapt it to what kind of the real need is in real time. So I just wanted to mention to you all, I'm not going to talk about these slides in a lot of depth, but I'll just say that we've done projects across a wide variety of areas. So health, well-being, and equity, I put this one first because we're at a mental health conference, of course. We worked with Greene County. They wanted to create a mental health navigator program. Our students who are in the public health evidence-based decision-making class have to do a project anyway. So they provided 3 evidence-based decisions that they could do. Then the Greene County Health Department took that, created a grant application, and then voila, they've hired a new public health educator, and they've now created a mental health navigator position in Greene County because the work that the students had to do anyway. The Wood County Health Department, they're trying to create a return on investment for what we call the community health improvement plans. I don't know if y'all call them that here, but every community has to do a community health improvement plan. And they're trying to basically convince their county board that public health is worth investing in, but they don't really have numbers. So they're trying to create an ROI framework. Adams County was looking for a process to prioritize the small amount of mental health services because they don't receive a lot of funding. It's a rural county. So they want to make sure that that money gets to the ones who need it the most. So our industrial systems engineers created a process by which to evaluate different needs, how severe is the need for that particular mental health services. Also, we had a community want to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring, in their ordinances. The College of Law did an ordinance review for them to look at where systemic injustice and racism was showing up in their laws. We also were helping a community build a better relationship with the Native nations that they didn't know much about, and they admitted that they didn't know a lot about it, so they wanted to learn more about it, and an environmental studies capstone helped them do that. The city of Madison is looking at creating a Friends of, or a nonprofit organization that can raise money for the Department of Civil Rights. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with Friends of groups. You probably are. Like, you oftentimes see them at nature centers. Like, Friends of a nature center can go and raise money. But this is a Friends of for diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff in the city. And they want to understand what are the legal challenges, how do we get nonprofits involved. So the School of Human Ecology and their Center for Community Nonprofit Studies worked on a feasibility study for that. So as you can see, lots of different departments can do lots of things for a variety of communities. Again, I'm not going to belabor these. We've done projects on sustainability that look at everything from blue-green algae to energy audits of public buildings to a sustainability action plan for an airport. We've done projects on criminal justice reform. We had kind of a controversy in the state of Wisconsin where our youth detention center called Lincoln Hills had a history of abuse, and they're closing down and phasing out Lincoln Hills, and they're going to replace it with site-based. I guess they call it the Missouri model. I'm not as familiar with this, but the Missouri model of basically trying to keep kids closer to home instead of sending them, 4 or 5 hours away where their family can't visit them. So Racine County is opening a new youth detention facility, and they want to try to reimagine their facility as a way to really get at rehabilitation to make sure these kids do not enter adult corrections. So we had some students in criminal justice help them rewrite their policies. Things like use of force, all the way down to like what mental health group should we offer to the youth who happen to be in that facility. We've evaluated drug treatment courts, OWI treatment courts. Brown County is looking for evidence-based suggestions for how to do reentry. We've worked on childcare issues, the affordability and access of childcare. We had several public affairs students look at what are the policy alternatives and what are the innovations for building, say, for instance, a community fund to address, the affordability of childcare. I mean, everybody knows the key to childcare is I think everybody knows. What I have learned, I should say, I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's just, the business model is just flawed. I mean, you can't pay enough to be able to then have the people who work at the child care facility make enough to keep them in that job for very long. So it's a market failure. So we're just essentially looking at ways to subsidize the program in a way that's just beyond state funding. Okay, so we worked with those. We worked with affordable housing issues. We have a whole department of real estate and urban economics who looks at affordable housing issues. We also have people in public affairs who are interested in that, even people in civil and environmental engineering who are looking at cheaper ways to build housing. So we've worked on a variety of projects on that. Economic development, this is one that, as you all know, a lot of communities, or especially rural communities, they don't know where the future of their workforce is going to look like. They don't know where all this is coming from. So we've worked on branding, helping people rebrand themselves, tourism issues. We even had one that's, I don't think it's on here. We had one look at, they are dealing with a major workforce challenge or workforce shortage, and they're looking at leveraging the Department of Labor's permanent resident program to get people from other countries here to actually be permanent residents. But if you just bring a bunch of people from another country and plop them in the middle of rural Wisconsin, there might be some issues if you don't think about how they're going to be integrated in the community. So they're trying to figure out how to retain residents and then also work on community acceptance of people who might not speak English, or kind of working with them and making your community supportive of those things. So students, what we try to do is make sure that the community partners articulate very clearly, what do you need from the students? Our students are really good at writing reports, but that might not be what our community partner needs. They might need communications materials. They might need a site design. So engineers do a lot of site designs. They might need a health impact assessment and evaluation. So we try to get really clear in the scoping process. What exactly do you need? And if a student can do that, great. And if they can't, then we don't work with that student and that faculty. We just move on to somebody else. It's not to disparage that person. It's just like, oh, okay, that doesn't exactly match what our community partner wants. Thanks, but no thanks. We also, I'll just mention to not be a snake oil salesman and be like, oh, this sounds too good to be true. We do charge communities to do this work. It's kind of a controversial thing in the community engagement world. I don't know if anybody works at their Center for Community Engagement, but you would probably they would probably be horrified to think about, oh my gosh, charging a nonprofit group to work on this kind of stuff. Well, we work with local governments, which have more access to funds. They can go to their city council, they can go to their county board and ask for funding for this. So we don't feel like it's an ethical issue. We feel like it actually gives them buy-in to the partnership. We've done these partnerships for free before, and you all can probably imagine that some people just stop responding to our emails because they're just like, oh, I got too busy, sorry. There wasn't an agreement or anything like that. But this actually makes them have to financially invest in the program. And then that means we then have to go back to their county board or their city council, their village board, and say, this is what you got for your money. So it kind of provides built-in accountability for everyone. We do have a couple of investors who have helped us get started. American Family Insurance, Epic Systems, not Epic N, Epic Systems, the one who do the MyChart thing. I don't know if anybody, it's based in Madison. And Alliant Energy Foundation, we do have an internal competitive grant called the Baldwin Idea, or the Baldwin Wisconsin Idea Foundation. Also, alumni stepped up to match some of those corporate donors. We have some in-kind. We get some staff for free from some entities. They're like, yeah, 50% of our time could be used for this. It sounds like a good effort. And then we also just got included in this governor's budget, but we have a divided government in Wisconsin. And basically the legislature hates everything that the governor put in his budget. And so they ripped it to shreds. And we just got a Republican champion to endorse us for being added back into the budget. That comes with a whole host of other things because this Republican, I'm not being recorded, am I? Am I being recorded? Am I being recorded? Okay, then I'm not going to say anything more. So it's created some interesting politics, I'll just say. I just, just to kind of emphasize, just a couple of quotes from our students. Suffice it to say, you don't have to necessarily read everything. Students find this really valuable, They learn professional skills. They learn things that they typically don't have written down in textbooks. It's not in the curriculum. I actually just had a student come up to me. I saw him at graduation and he was like, oh, Gavin, I'm so glad I worked with y'all's program because I'm now going to have to work with a lot of clients in my consulting that I'm going to be doing. And you all got me my first experience in actually working, sitting down, understanding what the needs are and being able to do regular check-ins. I mean, that's like how to be a consultant is not something that they teach well at the university, I'll say. Some do. There are some entities who do, but most students don't get that training. Okay, and then we also do evaluations. If anybody's curious about that, we do, actual survey, quantitative surveys. We do interviews, and we also do a long-term ripple effects mapping where we go back to the community years after what we do, and we ask, how did this affect the relationships in your community? If anybody wants to learn more about that, you just Google ripple effects mapping. University of Minnesota Extension has a great thing, but it's basically a way to evaluate things like community coalitions, things that are hard to evaluate. We did community impact mapping, suffice it to say, several years out, a lot of our community partners say, oh yeah, this is still working, or this spurred us to create this new committee, or we applied for a grant and we got it. That kind of stuff, or we saved an energy cost after we, did this energy building audit. I will say it is difficult to tell a cogent story when your projects are all over the map. That is probably one of the most difficult things that we've dealt with. But I think once we tell people some of our bullet points, people are really excited about them. I just wanted to mention, this is where I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk generally about community partnerships. But before I pivot, I just want to stop and say, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Does this spur any things in you? Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, it's a 3-year partnership that we have. Year 1 is getting to know the partnerships and the projects and making the matches. Year 2 is where the projects actually happen. And then year 3 is we kind of stick around and say, like, what else do you need? Was there a thing that you're like, gosh, it would be great if a student could really keep going on that thread, connecting them with an internship or something. I mean, everybody knows that there are lots of internship requirements, field placements, practicums that students have to do. Those are a little bit better suited for this kind of year 3 engagement where it's a little bit more of an individualized thing and not a class or a group project. Good question. Yes. Other thoughts, questions about anything? Okay. This is where I pivot into general community partnership ideas and thoughts about how to strengthen your community partnerships. I think anytime you're talking about your own individual community partnership, you want to start thinking about your strengths first, right? What makes you feel a sense of accomplishment? What's been initial impacts of your work? And I've listed a couple of things here. I think sometimes people in community partnership formation start thinking about problems immediately, like what's wrong with our partnership, but we don't start with what is a strength here. So I think it's really important. And what I wanted to do is share some of the model that we use in the ripple effects mapping. We use the social ecological model, which I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with, the Bronfenbrenner work from the 70s, but also the community capitals framework. Maybe you're familiar with that as well. I'm not as familiar with that, but it's more of an asset-based community development framework. So it just tries to look at what are all the impacts that you might be having at all these different levels in all these different ways. Because I think when you talk about impacts, you just think about like, oh, did somebody get a grant? Did we hire a new person? Like if new people are talking in the community that weren't talking before, that's an impact. And that's, kind of cultural or human capital. And sometimes people overlook those things in evaluating. So I just wanted to mention these are two frameworks that we use that we find really helpful. And this is the bare bones of the ripple effects mapping. You could kind of imagine university year as a pebble that you throw into a pond, and it creates ripples. And some of them are very clear, like your program. What did you do? What was it? And then the next, what are the outcomes that occurred in that context? How did those changes occur? And then what impact has your program had on these different kinds of capital? And these different levels of kind of human ecology. So this is just the basic thing. So I also wanted to mention some things that we have learned about community partnerships over the years of doing this. The 360 evaluation, where you don't just have a survey, 67% of students agree that I mean, that's nice. That's great. I'm looking at my new colleague here from the Department of Higher Education. They want that. They want the numbers, right? But the elected officials, that's not good for the elected officials. They don't just want to hear 67% of people did this. State elected or local elected, they want to hear stories. They want to hear people who have been impacted. So the more you can try to really capture those stories in your evaluation and not just rely on the numbers, we've learned that that's a really important thing. Another thing that people are a little skeptical of in the community engagement world is you have to do in-person community engagement. And if it's not in person, it can't work, Not meaningful for the student, the community partner doesn't get as much. We think that's a load of malarkey. You can do really good work. The students never have to step foot in the community as long as there are regular Zoom meetings, you're talking weekly or bi-weekly, and there's a clear agreement on what the students are to work on. This can work really, really well if you do digital community engagement. The funding model, we've learned the blended funding model, the more people you can have at the table, of course, the less you're going to be reliant on if one of them goes away. We didn't build our whole program based on state funding because we know that can come and go. If I get an influx of $300,000 from the state, that's going to be awesome. But it's not gonna, if I don't get it, it doesn't mean that I can't exist. We have a bunch of other people who believe in our program. We've also learned that we like to frame all of our projects around sustainability. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. When you start talking about sustainable development goals in small communities, it's got that United Nations thing attached. And I think there's a little bit of a conspiracy theory out there that the United Nations is like somehow weirdly trying to take over their community. So we just say the Sustainable Development Goals and we don't say the United Nations. But it essentially, the idea of sustainability, I think people often think of it through a very narrow lens of environmental sustainability. But what the SDGs do is broaden our notion of sustainability to things like if we end poverty and we end hunger and we end gender inequities, that also makes a community sustainable. These are goals at the national level, but a lot of cities, I would say bigger cities, have started to use them as almost voluntary reporting on how we're doing on a variety of social equity measures, as well as environmental. There are protecting land above water, protecting life below water. Those are things that are also included in the Sustainable Development Goals. But we found that as a helpful framework to expand people's notions of what sustainability means. We absolutely love it in terms of multi-stakeholder groups helping scope a project. It's really nice when the local government pulls in a nonprofit partner, pulls in a really involved teacher from the school district or something like that, versus having it just be the local government on their own. Because sometimes the local government can get a little, we're kind of doing our own thing and we're not really paying attention to broader outside stakeholder groups. So that's nice. We also ask often early in the process, how do you envision using these deliverables? What do you ideally want to be able to do in 2 years? And I think starting with that, like 2 years out, what do you want to be able to do helps us better be able to match them with students who can provide what tool that is. Whatever they need to do, they need a tool that can get them to that thing 2 years or 3 years out. So if it is a grant application, I keep coming back to that, then great. Our students can provide you with the bones of a grant application. What you don't need is the implementation of that right now. What you need is the grant to first get that. So before you can talk about implementation, if that makes sense. Structured university involvement can really help jumpstart projects. As I mentioned at the top of my presentation, a lot of these partnerships are kind of one-off, random. You can't really tell what's going to happen. But when you have one nice point of entry, like us, University Year, and we serve as like the ambassadors for that 3-year engagement, and they have one consistent group to look back to ask questions to, that really, really helps. It's not to say no cities were partnering with UW-Madison before we came along. Of course they were. But now they know exactly where to go. They know that they have a 3-year engagement. They know how much it costs. And then they know at the end of the 3 years, they can either end it or they can renew it. And so we found that to be very, very helpful, I think. This one is especially talking in the world of like people who are like sexual assault and sexual violence. You all know consent is a very, very important thing. We find that to be very important for community partnerships as well. It really doesn't work when somebody that you're working with doesn't want to work with you, or they were just told to work with you. I don't know if this has ever happened in your world. It certainly has happened in ours, where we get a community project lead that's like, who are you again? Like, my mayor told me that I had to like work with you on something. Like, no, this is not going to be a good partnership up front because you were not a willing participant. So that's a very important thing. Also, communicating with elected officials. If you're not communicating with elected officials along the way, this is what we're doing early, this is what we're doing in the middle of the partnership, this is the impacts. I think you're missing something. And then the last thing, and it's kind of like everybody knows this, there are no incentives to support this kind of work in universities and colleges. So it's driven us to ally ourselves with other people on campus who are fighting for changing the culture of higher education. I think that's a really important piece. We have kind of 4 common challenges that you see in community partnerships. I don't want to belabor these, but just saying, and I know, Cindy, you know these pretty well because we talked about them in our last engagement that we had. In the 4 common challenges in the design of the partnership: building collaborative relationships, managing and sustaining partnerships, and cultural equity and inclusion. I'm gonna breeze through these a little bit. I mean, I know it's 9:36, but I'd rather hear your interactions and feedback around this stuff. I'll just mention this is more of kind of like a diagnostic tool for you all to be thinking about what might be going wrong in your partnerships. Of course, we want to think about the strengths. We know that. We want to think about the strengths. But also there might be challenges. So in the design of partnership, if you don't have a shared vision, if you have misaligned values, if the benefits to one partner is not clear, say you're trying to serve college students, if that's really not the focus of what that community partner cares about, then that might not make a great partnership. If there's no definition of what success looks like, if there's no clear documentation for MOUs or even scopes of work just to outline, this is what I'm supposed to be responsible for, this is what you're responsible for. This is stuff that I think most people in this room know about, but sometimes we like skip over those fine steps. Like, yeah, I think we all know. Like, it's in the grant, no, it's like it's actually important to have you as a project lead and you as a faculty member to agree on what you're going to be doing. Okay, another one, building collaborative relationships, a lot of challenges here. Establishing trust and respect. I think a lot of times, especially in grant-based work, it feels transactional. It's like, we have this grant opportunity. You want to do something. Let's do it, And I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard university people going out to community partners saying, we have this great NSF grant that's going to change your life. And like, we need you to sign a letter of support for our thing. I mean, you all have probably heard that happen a lot. If it is just a transactional thing, it might work. It might. I mean, it very well could work. But I think if you don't have that history of respect and trust, and them kind of going with you, because within grants, they're going to be, it's like a roller coaster, right? Upside down and up and down. And, you're going to be a little disoriented at times. And if you don't have that core of trust and respect, and thinking about unity as that concept that we were talking about in the opening session, If you don't have people that are kind of committed to that unity, then it's going to be really easy for them to get off the roller coaster and just be like, okay, I was doing my job well before you got here, just fine. I'm out of here. It's like, no, we're committed to broader ideals and we trust each other, all this stuff. Because sometimes when you have that trust, the university partner can say, go with me here. It's going to be okay. And the community partner will be like, okay, I trust you. I know you're good for it. Great. I'll stay on the ride. Scope has to be right on. If the project is disorganized, if there's no clear dynamic champion for the partnership, we've learned that that's a very big thing. I mean, part of the reason we've been so successful, I think, is because a dean got behind us early on and said this is a really important thing. And then the mayor always has to be involved. So if you don't have a champion for the partnership, it's not good. If staff are not prepared, and also if there are power imbalances between staff, faculty, and students, this kind of like, I'm the expert, I'm the all-knowing faculty, and you're the community partner who needs access to our information. If you work with faculty who do not respect the wisdom of community partners, your project is probably doomed to fail. And you all have seen probably examples of this. Maintaining and sustaining the partnership. If it's not integrated into the mission, if you don't have clear processes to handle communication and decision-making, and it's like a cluster F, that can be a really big problem. There's no clear point of contact. I know that sounds silly, but like, I've seen partnerships that are like, who do I go to when I want this done? If there's no clear evaluation, if there's disagreement over how that funding is going to be used, if there's no celebration of successes, I like to mention that one. Like, whenever we do a good thing, we always ask our community partners, how do you want us to tell the story with you? Who are the people that you want to know about this story? Not just us doing a press release, but it's like, is there someone that you want in your community to know about it? If you can't evolve based on new learning, of course, staff turnover. And I put this one up there because this is one of those like sneak attacks. Like if you don't agree over facilities use, like I've worked in a lot of school partnerships. I told you all that. And we had a partnership almost break down because like students consistently left the teachers' classrooms in disarray. And they're like, if these damn students can't set up the classroom like we had it before, like you're out of here, you're out of the building. It had nothing to do with the quality of the partnership. It just means like, we just need to do a room setup. If nobody's thinking about that kind of stuff, that will destroy the partnership. Cultural equity and inclusion. This is one of those that's not as well documented in the literature. But basically, if there's consistent microaggressions, students not being prepared for those things, if there's not an intentional focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, if there's kind of structural racism driving some of your people, if they're, we might say they're, how do you say, like, if some people are working with a marginalized population and they have like really negative core beliefs about that population, that's, for instance, like what I'm talking about. If that kind of structural racism is baked into how people are thinking about populations and communities, you all have heard of SMART goals, measurable, actionable, whatever. I.e., I think is inclusive and equitable. So if you're not thinking about SMART goals in the context of inclusion and equity, I think you're kind of missing part of the picture. I also just wanted to share like an opportunity, like for each of these challenges, there are lots of different ways that you might think about addressing them. For instance, how do you share power? How do you create a shared power partnership? You can co-create projects. The university, again, is terrible at saying, we know what we want to do. You should help us implement it. But we say, hey, this is our interest. I think something that I learned in community organizing training a long time ago is self-interest is not a dirty word. Everybody has their own self-interest. So if you're not designing a partnership with your self-interest and the other person's self-interest in mind, that's not good. If you don't have, you could be doing formal recognition. Something that the formal recognition. I don't know if you all hear about this, but like parking is such a pain in the butt for a lot of our community partners on our campuses. So like if we could get them free parking, like that might actually go a long way because the person's like, wow, I don't have to worry about where to park. Or if we're paying them stipends to acknowledge their contributions. These are things that I think are kind of newer practices. Yeah. Also, oh my gosh, this one, the can you share files easily? I don't know about you all. We have this like pain in the butt with like Box. I mean, with this Box thing, and it's like a like Dropbox, but it's just Box. And like our community partners always have problems. Like if they don't, so we have to get them like a unique wisc.edu email address and all this kind of crap. Like if that's like, how do we share this file? If you can't get that figured out, it's going to breed frustration. And I'm sure it seems like everyone, I saw a couple of smiles and like nods. You know what I'm talking about. Building relationships, making sure it's really clear what you do at the initial meetings. Making sure that you explicitly discuss communications norms, agreeing on the final deliverable. I always say, like, be honest about what you can and can't do. I know we want to promise the moon and the stars to our community partners, but if you can't deliver on that, they want to know that. They don't want you to string them along and just pretend like you can do things. And then I just said, again, we all know this, document all these processes in an MOU, in a project description form. It doesn't mean that you have to sign it in blood or something like that. It just means like, okay, sign off on an email. Like, does this look good to you? That's all it can be. And then I just said, what changes are needed on your campus in order to get started with this kind of work? That can be a guiding question for our discussion for the remainder of the time, but I will stop there. This is my email address, cows.org. Cows is just a think tank on campus at UW-Madison. It used to stand for the Center on Wisconsin Strategy. Now it's just cows. It's like KFC no longer stands for Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's just KFC. It's kind of like that. That's weird, I know. But I promise you, I work at University of Wisconsin, even though my email address is gavin@cows.org. Great. Any questions or thoughts or discussions about your partnerships or anything that I've mentioned? Yeah, happy to take them or have a discussion. Yes.
About this ripple. I was going to talk.
Oh yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about the ripple way of evaluating things?
Yeah. The ripple effects mapping. Essentially what you do is you agree on a few key questions, and I have sample questions that we've used in the past, but it's basically community partners doing interviews with each other. And they ask like, hey, what are some new relationships that you've had, or what are some changes that you've noticed since doing this partnership? And the community partner, for each of those impacts, they write on a little sticky note, and then they put it on like this big kind of map. And then they try to make connections. Like once that's done, then we put that on a big map and we say like, oh, these relationships are clustered around this theme or this theme. So it's an interactive community tool where communities are interviewing each other and then figuring out where they made connections. Even sometimes at these sessions, we had the mental health navigator program I told you about that the Greene County Health Department ended up implementing. We're in the room and we're talking about projects that we did with the K-12 schools. And somebody was like, oh, we have this mental health navigator. And the school partner was like, what? You have a mental health navigator? We didn't know that. We could use that. So even in real time, even the process of getting all those diverse stakeholders in the room can yield impacts in itself. It's creating new connections. So the idea is to have that kind of people who were involved in these partnerships coming together, interviewing each other, and then seeing where the new connections are. Yeah, I mean, that's, I don't want to go in a big long lecture. I have a whole presentation that we've done on ripple effects mapping and what that looks like. But that's the kind of brief idea. But again, University of Minnesota has put together a great like step-by-step guide. So if you Google ripple effects mapping, University of Minnesota extension, they have like a great like 80-page workbook that you can look through. And I can also send you the PowerPoint that we use that is really, it's totally not rocket science. You just get good people in the room and have them ask questions to each other, and then like great stuff happens. I know it sounds overly simplified, but I promise it's real. Phil Donahue. No.
It's for the recording, everyone.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh gosh, sorry. I have such a loud voice already. I have to actually speak lower. I was wondering if you ever have students like collaborate with each other, like interdisciplinarily.
I
So I went I guess that answers my question.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I'll tell you some examples. But go ahead.
So part of what they do at the University of Michigan, I took a class on fixing foster care, and they brought nursing, social work, law students, public health students, and had them collaborate on a well, actually, we broke into little groups, but we worked on congregate care and like proposing a better way to go about congregate care using a Detroit congregate care facility as an example. So I was wondering if you've ever done something like that or encountered it.
That class is a cool class, and someone created that class, just like fixing foster care. We typically do not ask faculty to create new classes because that adds to their workload, and our thing is like, take your existing course and just orient it toward the community instead of, orienting it towards some fake thing that nobody cares about. I don't say it like that. But there's been things where like, an engineering group and a business class are both working on affordable housing on the same community, and we have put them in touch with each other, like super informally. And then even still, it's like the faculty were like, oh, this is like so hard to schedule. It's like, yeah, good stuff is like sometimes hard, it's okay. We do have things like a Master's of Design and Innovation, like that program naturally brings engineers and psychologists and sociologists and legal people in, and they recruit an interdisciplinary group. That's where I'm hoping we're going to have a little bit more success in like this design thing. They do like design thinking stuff. But unfortunately, again, like the silos are working against us in this instance. So we just had a couple of instances where some classes who are working on similar projects intersect, but that's about it, unfortunately. Yeah, darn university culture. Other questions or thoughts? Yes, sir.
Just real quick, are these positions for the students, are they paid?
No, they have to do the class anyway.
Now, how does that, at our university, we have corporate connections, community partnerships, internships, co-ops, service things. And our university students know some people get paid and some don't, and they won't even apply for the ones they say, why am I not getting paid when they're getting paid over here?
Yeah. Courses being the key concept here. I assume, and I realize that there's like a delicate balance here. Like, I don't want anyone to think that we're like exploiting students for their labor, for their free labor. What I've heard from students is that when they're in a class, and if it can offer them a real world concrete experience, they want that, because the alternative is to be in a class that's not offering that. So we do not pay students for their engagement in courses. I actually think there are like legal rules against that. Like, we cannot also give class credit that that students are being paid for. That said, there are like a couple of individual projects, like in that year 3, what I was talking about, there might be some individual internships, but if we paid students and paid faculty for every project that we've done 267 projects for the last 7 years, we would be bankrupt. I mean, we'd be bankrupt after the first year, because if I had to pay $2,000 for every project, we just wouldn't have enough money. So there have been internships, individual internships that we go and we find money for, and we can individually pay those students. But generally, when a student's working on a class-based project, they're not getting paid for that. They're producing that anyway. I mean, that's kind of our, I don't know. It's what we tell ourselves to make us feel better. I don't know. Like, students have to do class work anyway, and we're just trying to orient them toward a community partner. But it's a good question. I mean, it's something that we think a lot about, especially in that year 3 engagement, where there might need to be individualized work. I mean, I don't know. It seems like a lot of you all are engaged with your MPH programs, or a lot about MPH. Our MPH students have to do a 240-hour field placement that they can't get paid for. They just have to do it. It's part of their course curriculum. I don't know about you all's MPH programs, but they're called field play. It's called the Applied Practical Experience. It's their thing, and they're always looking for projects. And I think one of the reasons why I made friends on campus is that these people are looking for placements, and they have to go out on their own and find placements. And I show up with like 10 projects. They're like, oh, Gavin, thank you so much. Like, you've saved me all these hours of labor going to try to find community partner projects. So, Other thoughts or questions or concerns, reflections on your own stuff? I've been a very attentive audience. Thank you. I've been making eye contact with you all and seeing some smiles and nods and all that stuff. I really appreciate. Thank you so much, Jessica, for asking me to be here. I'm glad that I could be here with you all, and I'm hoping to make some new connections. If there's anything that I can do for your campus, by the way, if your campus is looking to do the same kind of project that we have, the local government university connections, we have a network of about 100 universities across the world, some in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Brazil, but also about 40 universities here in the United States who are doing the same model. So if you're interested in doing that, please let me know. We'd love to have you as part of the group. It doesn't cost anything to join us. But yeah, let me know. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.